Oh, that little baby broccoli, though. Oh, horrible.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
When he awoke, the dinosaur was still there. This is the story of the dinosaur. Not an excerpt, not the first line, but the entire short story called The Dinosaur by Guatemalan writer Augusto Monterroso. It goes to show you don't need anything long to make an impact. A story that prompted Italo Calvino to say that he would love to compile a collection with stories that just have one line, that are just made of one sentence. But unfortunately, nothing he has found so far matches The Dinosaur. Welcome to Port Moody Public Library's Keep It Fictional Book Chat. Last week, we celebrated Asian Heritage Month, and this week we have another May celebration for you, which, as you may have guessed from the intro, it is Short Story Month. It is my selfish topic for the year. We each got one of those, because I know that my love for short stories is not shared among the people here today, and that's okay. You're wrong, but that's okay. I am a fan of the literary format. I think thanks to many excellent short story writers who have shown me what a short story can do. And I always find that a well-crafted short story is, to me, much more impactful than any other formats. There is nowhere to hide. You need to use all the words you've got, and you don't have a lot of those. So I find that I really appreciate sort of the skills it takes to write a good short story. And I have found in reading sort of authors who have done both, like, trying to write a short story, who are really, really good at that, and then like really bad at writing novels, or the other way around. So I think there is different skills involved in that. So excited to find out. Oh, maybe, yeah, okay, you know what? Let's ask. Ask. Not that I want to hear it, but what is your opinion on the format in general? And later on, when you're talking about your book, I would love to know if the story or the collection that you chose for today has changed your mind, or whether it has just reaffirmed for you that this is not for you. So, feelings about short stories.
It's funny because the way you talk about short stories is the way I feel about poetry, which I know you're not a fan of, but I think it's the same idea, is that you really have to distill it down to like its purest format, and that something short can be very impactful in the hands of a skilled person. I think at the end of the day, net neutral about short stories. There have been short story collections that I have really enjoyed, and short stories that I think, yeah, that's exactly what I want out of this. I don't think it should be any longer. I don't think it should be, there's really more to say on it. And then there has been like the opposite side of it, where I'm like, this is just like a little toe dip into something that I wish was expanded, that I wish was longer. So I have had short story collections that I really did enjoy, and that kind of made me appreciate, as you said, like the skill that it takes to write a really good short story, because as we have seen many a time, like it doesn't always translate into a longer format. And then there have been short story collections that that left me wanting, I guess. So I'm a firm neutral on this one.
That's fair. And I think for Sadie, and I know I'm on the same boat, even though there are so many and they are like really famous for short stories, but I find science fiction short stories or fantasy stories really lacking. What Corrine was describing earlier, like I have only found maybe one collection that I really, really care about. So as a fan of the genre, Sadie, like how do you feel about short stories?
Yeah, I would say, and I haven't actually, to be completely honest, I haven't read a lot of fantasy short stories, but my guess is that because they require world building, it's just not always possible to kind of get enough time and enough space to explain kind of how the world works, how possibly the magic system works, kind of all that within that short amount of time. I think that similar to Korean, I'm a little bit neutral on them. I think that for me, I definitely like something that I can kind of sink my teeth into a little bit more and kind of really immerse myself in the world of it, especially if I'm enjoying it. Karine, I think you mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on our episode of books that took us a long time to read, that short story ones are ones that is like that for you. And I think that I agree with that, where if I don't have the through line, if I don't have finishing a chapter and knowing that the next chapter is going to be something that's relating directly back to that and making me want to continue reading, then I do struggle to, I think, get into it a little bit more. And so the book that I'm going to be talking about today has taken me a long time. It has taken me a very long time. And I have enjoyed it, but there's nothing that keeps me going back to it for more, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and I think that's true. Like it does take like I think a lot more to explore like a fantasy or science, because the whole point of it is that world building, like you said. So, when you don't have that opportunity to do so, I find that that's the same with science fiction and very often with fantasy novella. I find that that's my problem with them, is because they don't have enough. And so it's just like it's so surface, and I feel like I wanted to know a little bit more. So I can see why some of those genres may not be as conducive to short stories, even though there's quite a lot of them. Like, short story prices for those are like huge. So I don't really understand how it works. Maybe I just haven't found the right one. But I find for some of the other genres, it really works quite well. And I have to say that I find when it is a single story collection, because they don't have to focus so much on plot in some ways in development. And again, I think that's the difference between like me liking, not necessarily caring for plot. I find that I get to know an author a lot more because they don't have to be developing the plot. They're developing the ideas, they're developing their world. And to me, that's what's interesting. And I think it's that is the character that matters. And I find that a good short story really, and a collection of it, it just gets me to know the author so much more because of that. It's building up on that like idea of like what they kind of write about, what they believe in. But I think if we are kind of more, I guess plot, well, you prefer plot driven stories. I think I can see why anything longer might be better. And there is also such thing as too long. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you for sharing those feelings about short story. I think I'm going to start first, I think, actually. Let's get mine out of the way. I love short stories, and it was hard. So it was hard for me to pick a book for this topic because there's just too many that I want to talk about. But in the end, I end up going with a collection that blew my mind completely when I read it in March. And I knew that I would want to reread it. And I mean, it hasn't been that long, but it's just as good a time as any to reread it. And it's an author and a translator that I have never heard of. I just happened to see it on display at Massey Book Wednesday, but it does have some comparable authors on the book cover and the back, like most, Kafka, Beckett, and then of course Carrington. That's what got me. I know these comparisons don't always pan out, but I'm just a sucker for them. So I bought the book. I read the first story. I immediately know that I'm holding something super, super special in my hands. And it's probably the most solid 5-star book that I have this year. So the collection is called Panics, and it is by Barbara Molinard, and it is translated from French into English by Emma Ramadan. I also picked this one, and that's why I kind of wanted to go first too, because it's a bit of a heavier collection. May is also Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I wanted to pick something that sort of also fits that theme. So content warning for many mental health struggles in this book. And so please do skip ahead if you wish. So Panics is the only book by the author that is published. And even though she wrote a tremendous amount, and in fact, she felt compelled to write and write and write and write constantly. However, everything that she wrote, she tore it up right away. Maybe more accurately, she said that it's the enemy that tear them up into 4 neat pieces, and then they burn them. So this collection only came about because her husband and also her mentor / writer, Marguerite Duras, basically just urged her to like, please just hand over these pages. And so they kind of rescued them. And so this was published in 1969. The translator, Emma Ramadan, when she was working on a book by Dura, she came across the name of Barbara Molinard. And she's never heard of her before. But it was very clear that Dura thinks very, very highly of this author. So she tried to find the book, but it's out of print. It's nowhere to be found until she manages to get a copy through the library, because libraries are amazing like that. So same thing, she read the first story and she immediately knew that this is a book she must pitch to her publisher to get her to translate it, to let her translate and publish it. And she felt that this is one of those books that really, like, it, there's books that you feel like it complete a part of you, and that's how she felt when she read this book, and she very, very much wants to bring this to more readers. And so thanks to all these people, we have a chance to read this collection. So I'm going to talk about some of the stories. I think, as you mentioned before, it's kind of hard to talk about a short story collection, and I'm going to give a warning now. I'm going to spoil the first story ending here because, again, if what I've said so far intrigued you, you might want to skip ahead so you can experience the story yourself. But I am going to provide spoiler because I don't know if there are any words that I could use to describe the kinds of story that Molinard wrote. And I think providing the ending and just telling you about it, I think it might make it a little bit easier to see. So the first story in this collection, which is my favorite, is called The Plane from Santa Rosa. And it starts with a woman trying to find out when the plane is going to arrive. She tried to confirm and reconfirm, much to the annoyance of the employees, that the plane from Santa Rosa is indeed scheduled to land at 7:50 that night. And it's such an important occasion, she really doesn't want to get the time wrong. So that's why she keep asking. She also want to make sure that she look her best to mark the importance of this occasion. So she spends the rest of her day going from store to store, trying to find the right clothes to wear. But nothing seems right. Just nothing works. And again, the employees are just like, she's not going to buy anything because she's not satisfied with anything. So finally, it's getting close to the time. So she went home, she got changed, and she commuted to the airport. And when she arrived, she can see there are other people there already waiting for the same plane to arrive. She could just feel the excitement. There's like such an anticipation in the air. And then the doors start opening and the passengers start coming through. And she can see all around her, people are hugging, people are kissing, people are like just reuniting with the families, with the friends, or meeting new people. And there was just such joy there. And after a while, people start to leave. And then she realized that she's the only one left. And she knows that it's time to go. And on her way home, she thought about her day. She's glad she found something to do for the whole day. But then panic starts sinking in once again when she realized that she will have to figure out what to do tomorrow. That's the kind of story that Barbara Molinard does. Again, talking about sort of the perfect short story that gives you in a few pages all you need to know about the character and what they're going through. And then it delivers that ending that, despite how I felt like emptied out once I read that story, but despite of that, it's the perfect ending. There's no other way that this story could end. And that's how I think a great short story, what it does is that it gives you, it's just, you don't need any more. Like as Corinne said, you don't need any more words to this. This is all you need. And that's, I would say, all her stories are like that. And they all talk about sort of that struggles that she has with her mental health and all the characters that is in the story. There's one called The Headless Man, and that describes a woman sitting on a bench every day, just watching people go by. And sometimes she sees them kind of transforming into these monstrous animals right in front of her. And one day a headless man sat next to her. And for a few days, she meets the same headless man, and they didn't talk. They didn't say anything to each other at first, but after a few days, they started talking, and the woman says that she's been trying to catch a train, but she always seems to miss it. And so this headless man offers to help. Another story called The Cage is about a man and a woman meeting each other, feeling that they have finally found someone, that they can connect with. And it's evident that there's so much joy between the two of them. Even the owner of the cafe that they visit every day tries to delay their departure every night by offering them just one more drink so that they can stay behind, because he also wants to feel that joy. And one day, the man Pierre decides to visit the zoo, and Bertha is not really sure whether she wants to do that or not. She's not looking forward to this because she never likes seeing animals in cages, but she went anyway because of Pierre. And when they were there, they were looking at the different animals. And when they finally got to the boa constrictor, Pierre suddenly has this vision of Bertha caressing this snake. And he couldn't get that out of his head. And then every single Sunday, he insists on going back to the zoo to stare at the boa constrictor. And Bertha doesn't know what to do with that. Another story called The Father's Apartment, about a woman who has been trying to make a ladder for like months. One day, a young man came to her and said that, my father has decided that you get the apartment, but the apartment is way up on the skyscraper. So if you need to reach it, you need to build a ladder. And since that encounter, that's what she's been doing, just every day trying to make this ladder and build another step, another step, another step. And often she will want to give up because she doesn't think that there's a point to this. But every time she is just on the verge of giving up, the young man will appear as if he can sense her wavering resolve. And there is such sorrow in his eyes that she feels that she needs to continue, and she does. But what happens when she completes this ladder? Another story called The Taxi, about a woman who finds herself stuck in a cab with a driver who drives erratically, a driver who seems intent to run everything down and hit everything. And she's sitting at the back. There's nothing she could do. The driver keeps looking at her in the rearview mirror just to see her reaction. And she remembers, she keeps trying to tell herself that she cannot react. She cannot scream. No matter how frightening she found herself in this situation. The French title of the collection is Viens, which means come. And there are two stories in here, which is called Come, and also another one called The Meeting, both about someone who has been invited, who has heard this beckoning that you need to come. So they did. They try to go where the person is, but somehow this journey just seems to take forever. Or when he gets there, the town just seems abandoned, and he doesn't understand why. Like, you would invite somebody if you're not going to be there. Like, where did everybody go? And that struggle that they try to get there, and hearing this voice that just keep telling them to come, but just never can get there. And all of Molinard's stories speak of this, really, just this painful existence of life from a total outsider point of view, that you're only able to watch, and you're basically every day you realize day in and day out that you just don't belong, and you don't know how to reach that world, despite all the people telling you to come, to join, and you'll try. It just doesn't work. You don't understand the world. And as I said, all her stories are just perfectly captured. There's nothing else you need. And I think at the end, once the story ends, and I find with short stories, a lot of times they don't have to be clear what the ending is. It could be an ambiguous ending, but you always feel that you know where the story is going to go because the author has shown you everything you need. And to me, that is the power of a great short story. And that's what every single one in this collection does. I am absolutely in awe. Like, I'm totally blown away by her work, but I'm also very aware of what she had to go through for these stories to exist. So if you have the capacity to tackle this kind of collection, or if you're not convinced that short stories can be powerful, that it requires that skill to write, like we talk about, and if you don't think short stories are for you, maybe you just haven't met the right one. So I will urge you to check out this collection published by the Feminist Press. It is called Panics, and it's by Barbara Molinard, and it is translated by Emma Ramadan. All right. So let's switch gear. We're going to change over to Corinne and see what she's got for us.
All right. So it's funny, Virginia, that you mentioned kind of the struggle of a perfect sci-fi or fantasy short story. Because I really do feel that is the genre that I usually end up the most dissatisfied when I am reading short stories, with some like very notable exceptions. And the exceptions, I would say, kind of veer more on the horror side of things than kind of like a sci-fi or fantasy, because again, you really want to delve into it. And often after a lot of stories, you just kind of go, is that it? It's, but there's so many more questions than you get answers. So keeping all that in mind, I decided to read a collection of sci-fi short stories. Although this is a bit of a misnomer, because I now realize as I'm kind of flipping through it that half of it is a short story collection and then half of it is just a full novel. It's just a whole novel, but I think it still counts. So this is an author that has been brought up on the podcast before. I believe Al talked about Counterweight, but I may have just absolutely dissociated during that book talk, because I have also read Counterweight and was confused. But this is an author that we have had on the podcast before. This is Djuna, who is named after Djuna Barnes, who was an American artist, illustrator, journalist, and writer known for Nightwood, a cult classic of lesbian fiction and an important work of modernist literature, and also a character from Ellery Queen. So this is kind of where this author is in their headspace, drawing from a lot of allusions and a lot of different places. Now, Djuna is considered a literary giant and one of the most prolific and important writers of Korean sci-fi. And that's it. That's all the information you're going to get. This is a pseudonym, and they have absolutely like clung to the pseudonym and their anonymity, which I find very interesting. They only communicate through email or chat, and I think they would honestly be a really fun talk. In their author's notes at the back of the book, which is part that I really enjoyed after having read most of the stories, is they're really interested in the idea of like translation, about writing, about sci-fi, talking about Korean sci-fi and the evolution of that. They're interested in old Hollywood. They're funny. I think they would honestly be a really fun person to have a conversation with. They seem to have a sly sense of humor about their own writing, about their own place within like the Korean pantheon, and just about sci-fi in general. So this collection of short story plus novel feels a bit disjointed, and that's kind of on purpose. This was never meant to be a cohesive collection of short stories, but rather it is kind of a collection of their writing that has been translated by Adrian Thieret and published by Kaya Press as a way of an introduction of this author into the English-speaking markets. Now, their other book, Counterweight, translated by Anton Her, came out last year, I feel, maybe Time is a Construct. Not this year, came out. And so this is a collection of their short stories that they have been kind of publishing since 1997. And you do kind of get a little bit of whiplash going from one story to the other. There are kind of through lines throughout it, which I think are just things that the author is interested in. For example, allusions to old Hollywood. There is definitely a sci-fi element, I would say, in most of them. Again, they're quite funny, and they're all really disturbing. I have never been like so aware of my body being just like a flesh sack as I have while reading their stuff. One of the short stories, Pentagon, which I think has a lot in common with Counterweight, starts with the line, "Corpses are just clumps of rotting protein." Yeah. I'm going to be perfectly frank. This is not for me. I don't know why I thought it was for me, but it's definitely not for me. It's one of those things where I could definitely appreciate the skill of it and just be like, everything about this is hard for me to read. Some of the standouts in the collection for me were The Rabbit Hole, which is an extremely short story. I would say no more than 10 pages, about what at the beginning you think is a child who discovers a secret passageway under their bed that rumbles like a digestive system running on 42-minute, 24-hour second cycle. And it's furry. And the child finds this tunnel underneath their bed. I know, Sadie, you're doing a shaky head, and it gets worse. And they're looked after mother, who we slowly discover is not a mother. And the child is also not a child. It's like a pet child, and has been a pet child for 34 years, being taken care of. Holograms, maybe? Alien holograms? For no reason that they can discern. Yep. So that haunted me. As I was talking with Virginia earlier, this is a very long book, and I had read this one when it kind of first came out, and then I had to return it to the library. But that story stuck with me because you don't get any answers. There's no answers for you. Good luck trying to find them. The other one that I really enjoyed actually wasn't a sci-fi story. It was Memoir of a Chosun Bride, which is about a young lady in the Joseon era who is kind of married off after her scholar father dies to a large family where her father-in-law is also a revered scholar. She's married off to a young man in the family who has a developmental disability, but because she has no prospects or no hope, they think that this is a good fate for her. She's kind of shoved aside to the women's quarters and lives a fairly easy life. However, when the father-in-law dies, things change. During the period of mourning, all of his sons go out to the grave to stand and pay their respects to him. And as they're all gathered in the courtyard eating, there's a knock on the door. And who should it be? Father-in-law's back, baby! But not the same as he was. What follows is a very, very bloody vampire story, which honestly would have made a really great movie. And that's the thing. With these short stories, like, they write like an action movie. Like, Nicolas Cage could be involved in any of these things. Like, they just feel really cinematic in their conception. And sometimes because it feels like you're watching a little movie in your head, you don't really get it. The characters are not important here. They're who cares? Really, it's about like the action and the talking and the dialogue and like the slickness of it. And I think that's kind of what both the translator and the foreword by Kyu-Hyun Kim kind of talk about, is like this very movie-like concept to their writing. And they're definitely like very kind of within the sphere of thinking about movies, thinking about Korean cinema, thinking about Hollywood cinema, and like the intersection of both, which really makes it, at the end of it, like you feel like you've watched like a really good action film. And as like an adherent of the Fast and Furious franchise, like, I'm not angry. Like, that was pretty good. Yeah, the Memoir of a Joseon Bride, father-in-law's back. He's brought all his brothers and they don't have eyeballs anymore. Too bad. And so she kind of gets roped into procuring meals for everyone, which is like a very, very interesting kind of like subversion of like the women's role in society is like to provide food. And sometimes your food is folks from the village, but not too many people, because then they're going to get suspicious. And then she also might be immortal, like, don't worry about it. There is also the other one that is probably going to haunt me. Again, these are very disturbing, is The Bloody Battle of Broccoli Plain. And this is kind of like tied into their bigger universe, like a sci-fi universe about indifferent aliens who colonize Earth and start using us for like building materials, but they don't really care about us, so don't worry. And in fact, you could hitch a ride onto their spaceships and they'll take you up to space. And so because no one cares about this, they start colonizing things, but then there's like space disease or space sickness and a lot of fighting. But also in this story, our main protagonist, hitches a ride up to one of their fun little planets, and there's like a little like broccoli friend that walks around that's a little broccoli alien. But because there's nothing on this planet for this guy to eat, he kills the little baby broccoli alien, but there's no meat in it anyway, so it's pointless. And the little broccoli gives a little scream. Horrible. So yeah, there are things that are definitely going to stick with me for a long time. And I think that's pretty impressive to do, like in 10 pages or less, to do something that has like radically altered my brain chemistry. It's very interesting that I don't know that any of these have been adapted for screen, which is curious. And it may be that the author themselves is not interested in doing that. But I think a lot of them would make really good movies. I'd love to see like Chosun era vampire. Well, no, she's not a good person. Well, but she's in a tricky situation. Well, but her father-in-law is kind of. Anyways, that's for them to decide. Yeah. So if you're looking to kind of get at the root about, again, like a literary giant of South Korean science fiction authors, they are definitely like a trailblazer in the genre. You can see that they're always grappling with a lot of stuff. And by every short story, I was like, I'm definitely missing something here. I flipped to the back and it's like, oh, this is an allusion to this. This is an allusion to this. This is an allusion to that. I'm like, okay, yeah, I clearly did miss something. Again, I love a good author's note. Especially when something is like as dense and crunchy as this, I'm like, I love a good little explanation. I'll report back on the novel at the back of this once I finish it. So yeah, if you're kind of looking to kind of delve into South Korean science fiction, I would definitely recommend picking this up because you'll get a really good sense of kind of like a master at work who's kind of laying the groundwork for everything that comes after. Yeah. Oh, that little baby broccoli though. Oh, horrible. Horrible.
I read all of it except I haven't got to the broccoli one yet. So now I have to go back and read it again because yeah, there are definitely some images in there. I have to borrow that again from the library because it's a long book, like you said. But yeah. All right. Well, before we go into Sadie's book, I got my question for everybody today is I mean, I know that not everybody agree, but I think stories short, good. What else is good? What else is better short?
I have some opinions. As a short person, a lot of things, chairs, much better short, cupboards, really, really good short. Anything that you have to sit on, really. The number of times I just sit on the bus dangling my feet like a child because my feet don't touch the ground on the back seats of the bus. It's a little disappointing. So anything that you would have to sit on short is good. Short is definitely good. I'm going to say essays that you have to read for school. Very good when they are short. I'll probably think of some others, but I'll let other people talk.
But I love the fact that we are short, that we can dangle our feet just like a child. I can kick my feet constantly. I love doing that. I'm so glad I'm short that wherever chair I sit on, I cannot reach the ground. And that is fine because then I can just kick my legs at people. I love doing that. So, Corinne, what's better short?
This feels like a riddle. Like it has riddle energy. I'm going to say meetings. Love a short meeting. Love a short meeting. Love like a really tight agenda where someone's just like da 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 da, and then you can just spend the rest of the time chatting. But just yeah, short meeting.
Oh, I texted my husband. I'm like, what is better short? And his first answer was surgery, which shorter the better. Not wrong. And then he said car, because it's easy to park a car if it is short, because I would never want to drive a huge car. So like, a hatchback, excellent. I know I can work that car. So yeah, so stuff like that. I don't know.
I grew up with a Ford Taurus station wagon as the car that I learned how to drive on. So I can vouch for that. It was very difficult to park. And I think that I still give myself way more room than I need to anytime I park my now very well-sized Honda Fit, because I just think that my car is bigger than it actually is.
Yeah, we used to call it the boat, back when cars had like a lot in the front and a lot in the back. And I remember my first time driving like a U-Haul when I was moving, and I've only done it once, and I had to like parallel park. And oh God, it was so agonizing because I'm not a confident parallel parker to start with, like Sadie. I think my car is way bigger than I think it is. And I was getting so upset that a garbage truck was coming in the opposite way and was such a narrow street, and they're honking their horn at me, and I'm like, the garbage truck driver hopped out of his garbage truck, essentially shoved me out of the vehicle, and then parked for me. Because he's like, you got to get out of the way. I'm like, I don't know if I can. So yeah, that's a good answer too.
My dad has done that before, not with as much aggression, but we were parking in a parking lot in Granville Island, on Granville Island. And I think we were in a truck and he like very seamlessly like backed into like this tiny little spot, and someone in a car waved him over like, "Can you please park my car for me?" Like, I can't do it. And so my father being a professional bus driver for most of his career, he's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." 2 more to add to my list. Lineups. Lineups are much better short. And jungle gyms, because when my child gets stuck on top of them, I can't get her down. And I've explained this to her that if she climbs above a certain point, she's on her own. We've had to be rescued one time by a parent of another child who is much taller than me. But yeah, so jungle gyms. And I know that defeats the purpose of a jungle gym if they are short, but yeah. And tantrums, much better short.
Work day, short's better. Yeah, no, there's many good short things. Like a good short story. The Sadie, do you have one of those for us?
One more thing I would like to add. You and me, Virginia.
Yeah,
we are very good short things as well.
We're very good at being short.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time I've been called tall, so thank you.
So relative.
When I was in high school, and this is a very strange story, but when I was in high school and I was in acting class and we were split up into groups, and we were in groups and we were told that the person who is the tallest gets to go first, and we're off doing our thing. And then I hear this voice from across the room. "I'm the tallest? I've never been the tallest before." And it was very exciting for my friend Jocelyn. Anyways, yeah, so I think that my book is a little bit different because mine is the only one that has multiple authors. So mine is a compilation of short stories. And I will say that finding the book was not too difficult. I knew that I was in the mood for a mystery. And so I went on a search for a book of mystery short stories. Now, after I had ruled out Sherlock Holmes and all of the like author and series specific ones, like there's a lot of authors who write short stories surrounding their main series of books. So once I had ruled all of that out, I was left with a couple of options. The book that I ended up choosing, I went with because I was looking for something that was a little bit different, wanting to read some new perspectives, which this book promises right off the bat. So this is The Perfect Crime, 22 crime stories from diverse cultures around the world. This is edited by Vaseem Khan and Maxim Jakubowski. One thing I would say, we were talking kind of about fantasy sci-fi not being a great genre for short stories. I think mystery actually is a wonderful genre for short stories because you can basically just have a mini mystery in each of your short stories and then you solve it and it wraps up quite nicely. One thing I will say for a lot of the stories in this book, and I think maybe for short stories in general, kind of, I think this kind of goes to what you were saying, Virginia, about the first story that you talked about, where it just kind of ended in the perfect way, the way that it kind of had to end. I think that one of the challenges maybe for short stories, or one of the things that authors are challenged to do is find that almost perfect last line, that perfect last paragraph, last line that either makes the story make sense, wraps up the story, leaves it open-ended, whatever they're trying to achieve. I think that more than novels, short stories are aiming to get that perfect last line. And some of the ones I read did that, some of them not quite as successfully. So the book does start with introductions from both Khan and Jakubowski, and both editors talk about how with this compilation, they set out to celebrate the new and diverse voices writing crime and mystery stories, and even more to highlight just how diverse the genre has become in only just a few decades. They make a point of saying that before that, the genre was for the most part very white. There are definitely some exceptions. Some of the names that they mentioned are Rudolph Fisher and George S. Schuyler, who were writing in the 1930s, Chester Himes, who was writing in the 50s and 60s, and then later Mosley and Mike Phillips, who are writing in the 90s, just to name a few of who the editors kind of think of as the pioneers of kind of more diverse voices within this genre. However, that being said, the majority of crime books that were being written were by white authors, not always telling white stories, which is problematic in its own right, but also just telling very white stories. And so in this volume, Kahn and Jakubowski wanted to gather together writings from a variety of cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Some of these cultures include African American, South Asian, First Nations, Latinx, Chinese American, Singaporean, and Nigerian, again, just to name a few of the backgrounds that are included in this book. I wanted to provide a platform for these authors to tell their stories from their perspectives and backgrounds. And this book does include stories from authors who I was already familiar with. And I'm sure that many of you would also be familiar with them, probably more so than I am if you are a mystery reader already. Authors I already knew, such as Silvia Moreno Garcia and Thomas King. There's also many, many authors who are brand new to me. Full disclosure, I did not finish this book. I did not finish all of the stories, as over the last few weeks or months, my daughter has decided that sleep is optional and going to bed before 10 p.m. is discouraged. And so my reading time has unfortunately disappeared to nothing. But I did read a handful of the stories, some of which I enjoyed more than others. And I'm going to give you a preview of a few of these. Within the style of these stories, there is also a huge amount of diversity. Some take place in the present day, some are historical, some follow a more straightforward traditional path, and some are much more twisty and creepy. There's representation of classic Agatha Christie-esque murder mysteries, Darth Gothic mysteries, high-action thrillers, CSI-style serial killer stories, psychological thrillers, and everything in between. First story I will tell you about is by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Now, I've only read one of her books, but I would say that the vibe of this story is very on point for her writing, at least in relation to Mexican Gothic, which is the book that I read. The Land of Milk and Honey tells the story of Don Aurelio Helidoro Vallejo Pacheco, a man who did not believe in modern ideas about women. A woman was not supposed to venture out into the world or attend school. Her place was in the home, where she could stay safe from the dangerous glare of the city's lights. Now, the 6 women in Don Aurelio's life did just that. His sister, his wife, and his 4 daughters stayed in their home, sitting in the living room, knitting booties and blankets and clothes to dress the plaster baby Jesuses that were brought out every Christmas. They sat and they knit, day after day. Nothing ever changed. That is, until the spring of 1949. In the spring of 1949, 2 things happened. First, Ophelia, the youngest of Don Aurelio's daughters, turned 19. Second, Don Aurelio, unfortunately, tripped outside after a night of drinking and broke his leg, making him unable to run the errands and complete the tasks that were required to keep their property running smoothly. Now, he wouldn't accept that his sister, his wife, or any of his daughters could in fact run these errands, so he instead sent word to a cousin who had a son who was looking for work. And this is how cousin Arturo came to live in the Pacheco household. Ophelia had never been allowed to be around young men. And so watching Arturo, with his strong arms and full lips, was quite a new experience for her. As spring turned to summer, Ophelia found herself watching Arturo more and more. And by the middle of summer, the 2 were meeting in Arturo's room most nights. Arturo would buy her things, magazines, stockings, perfume, things that her father would never let her have. And he'd whisper in her ear plans of them leaving, of them running away together, creating their own life somewhere else. By October, the 2 of them were taking money from her father's safe to fund their escape. But all Ophelia had ever known was this decrepit, falling down house and her knitting. Arturo could be the answer to all of her problems, but he could also be a threat to everything she has ever known. And as their date of departure nears, Ophelia's desperation starts making her question everything. And the rat poison in the cupboard is looking more and more appealing by the day. This story is very atmospheric. It is dark. It is creepy. It is gothic. As I said, it is very true to what I understand to be Moreno Garcia's style. The next story has a much different vibe than the last. I think that this is actually one of my favorite stories that I have read so far. It's called Sundown, and it's by Sheena Kamal. And it starts at a small town gas station somewhere in Washington state. Nora has been driving from Vancouver with vague plans of driving straight through to Mexico, though she's not committing to anything yet. When she pulls her old Toyota Corolla into the gas station parking lot, she's almost immediately waylaid by a black man who looks to be maybe 5 years older than her. After Nora gets her dog to stop barking, she asks the man what he wants. All he gives her is a warning. Don't stay here tonight. It's not safe for people with skin like his or skin like Nora's. Just get back in the car and keep on driving. Nora thanks him for his warning, but she really needs to pee. And so she slips inside the gas station and asks the attendant for the bathroom code, which she just saw a perky white woman, soccer mom type, emerging from in a candy pink sweatsuit. When she's immediately told by the attendant that the bathroom is out of order, Nora starts to understand more what the man in the parking lot was talking about. Now, Nora's not willing to risk her own safety over a bathroom. So she pays for her gas, leaves, and resigns herself to the fact that she will probably have to pull over and pee in the woods at some point. On her way out of town, Nora sees a young woman walking along the side of the road, heading back into the town. She knows that she has to stop. The woman, or girl really, looks to be Latina and is probably about as welcome in that town after dark as Nora would have been. She eventually agrees to get into Nora's car and introduces herself as Raquel. When Nora asks her where she's going, she tells her that her friend is trapped and she needs to go to the police. Well, Nora has a pretty good idea of what the police in this area will say to a young woman of color, and she's not about to let Raquel get herself into even more trouble. So against all her better judgment, Nora tells Raquel that she will help her get her friend back and drives the two of them headfirst into danger. She figures if she's never going to talk to her own child again, she may at least try to save someone else's. So I said, this is one of the stories that I liked better in the book. The character of Nora is one that I find I often gravitate towards a similar style. She's strong and independent. She's acquired skills that make her not necessarily someone you want to mess with, but she has a sort of tragic or secret past that she's trying to run away from. I was definitely engaged in this story from the start right to the finish and would definitely be into reading more about Nora, which I'm happy to say that Sheena Kamal has written 3 books about Nora. So I think I will probably be checking those out, which I didn't realize at the time that it was part of a bigger series. I'm going to tell you about one more story. And I will say that it is actually not one that I would say is in my top picks, but it is one that is drastically different from the first 2. And one that I think is important to read. It's called Either Way, I Lose, and it's by John Vercher. It takes place in Omaha, Nebraska in 1919. Our protagonist, who goes by White, is a young man looking to make a better living for himself. This is how he has found himself in the office of Billy Nesselhaus, right hand to Pick-Handle Dennison, top players in the underground world of gambling, drinking, and prostitution. White has started to earn a reputation for himself, one that gets you noticed by men like Nesselhaus, gets you noticed, and if you're lucky, or not, depending on how you look at it, gets you employed. Now, White is told that Nesselhaus and Dennison have been having some trouble with the current local government. Trouble that would be remedied quite nicely if the person in power was more controllable. And so, they need White to help guide their current mayor out of his position. If they can make it look like the mayor has no control over his city and isn't able to protect the upstanding, hardworking white citizens, then maybe the population will be more inclined to push for someone new. And this is where White comes in. If he can make it look like a well-off white woman is being assaulted and harassed by a black man in the city, then that's just the impetus the rest of the population needs to rise up. White starts to get a vile taste in his mouth. It gets worse, and it feels like a pit has opened in his stomach when Nesselhaus hands him a can of shoe polish. And it becomes clear what he is being asked to do. In this city, at this time, White is lucky. Because to the average viewer, he comes across as white as Nesselhaus himself. However, White knows that this is not an entirely accurate representation of his background. And the thought of incriminating other Black people makes him want to turn and run as fast and as far as he can. However, now that Nesselhaus has his eye on White, he wouldn't get too far before being dragged back. So to save his own skin, White does what he has to do. However, when another Black man is accused of his crime and dragged out of the courthouse by a mob, White realizes that no matter what choice he made, he was never getting out of this alive. This story was hard to read. This story was devastating, both as an accurate and horrifying historical account, but also as a reflection of the possibility that our world is not too slowly turning into something that could be very similar to this. These are just 3 examples of some of the stories that you'll find in The Perfect Crime, 22 crime stories from diverse cultures around the world. Even though I'm not a big short story reader, I will say that when you have something like this with stories from so many authors and backgrounds, you can't read it and not find at least something, at least one story, 1 or 2 that you enjoy or connect with. For me, not everyone that I read was a winner, but there were definitely some that I was able to fully immerse myself in. I think that so far, Silvia Moreno Garcia has top pick for the best ending line of her story. She does a quite good job of ending quite well. And so I think that if you are in a crime mood like I was and you're wanting stories from a new perspective or stories that take place in part of the world that you may not usually read about, then I think that this book would be a really great fit. So this is The Perfect Crime, 22 crime stories from diverse cultures around the world, edited by Vaseem Khan and Maxim Jakubowski.
Thank you, Sadie, for bringing an anthology today. I think you're right that, the variety, it sometimes could vary in quality and also just what works for you also. But it's nice when with an anthology, you probably get introduced to so many more authors and that you can check out other things. So that's kind of nice that way. So yeah. Well, thank you for doing this topic. Each of you can now have one that you can torture me with in the year. So put that into the spreadsheet. And I hope that in May, our listeners out there, you get a chance to read at least one, try one, just pick one. You don't have to read the whole collection, just read one short story, maybe just one. And then maybe you discover that they are not too bad, or maybe you'll find one that you like, or even give the one that you didn't quite like, maybe there will still be others. Anyway, well, I hope that you there's still some days left in May, so hope you will join in and celebrate just a little bit of this short story month. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next week. Happy reading.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.